for all of our teens out there who are your fans, thinking about how we support our young folks. So if you're a teenager, maybe you went into quarantine or school got canceled right as you started to have a crush on someone, or started to have, just started a date, and now that's really shifted. So I've been thinking a lot about that, thinking about all the young folks out there who are going through this. And I know that we're going to have a great conversation about that. Our other author today is Becky Albertalli. Becky is the co-author most recently of Yes, No, Maybe So with Aisha Saeed, but Becky is probably best known for Simon versus the Homo Sapien Agenda and many, many other books. But we're going to have kind of a wide-ranging conversation about what it means to be well, what it means if you're not well, and how that's still okay, and what it means to write in light ways or funny ways or human ways about things that people are sometimes scared to talk about. So I just want to say, if you are able, we would love for you to pick up this book today from charisbooksandmore.com. We will ship it right out to you. And if you would like to also get this book from charisbooksandmore.com, we are happy to do that as well. We are shipping all over the United States, and we're trying to do that as fast as we can because we know that books are an essential part of your wellness.
And
So
anyone who gets my book, at least from Charis, is going to get a signed personalized book plate and a sticker and lots of kudos. And actually, after yesterday's virtual event, we got an anonymous donor who wanted to donate books and basically said that they would donate the books of the authors from yesterday and today. So anyone who buys a book from Charis or the other indie bookstore is going to be in a drawing to get another 5 books. So like in my brain, I'm like, free stuff. So
yes.
So go get on that, guys.
Yes, please do that. And thank you for that generosity to that anonymous donor. We really appreciate it. Indie bookstores need your help right now. Indie authors who are launching books at this moment really need your help right now. And we all need good stories right now. So I'm going to get out of the way. We'd love for you to start liking stuff in the comments. Leave your questions, leave your comments. It's going to be an interactive conversation. We're so lucky to be here today with all of you. Thank you so much. Enjoy.
Yeah, we're so lucky to be here. I was telling Becky the other day that I've been wanting to do an event at Charis for so long, but it just didn't work out with the geography of this launch. And then like as soon as everything got canceled, I was like, I can do something at Charis. And so this is so wonderful. I've been in love with Charis since I think 2 years ago when We Need Diverse Books, which I'm a founding member of, actually had a Bookseller of the Year award. And we got, dozens of nominations from around the country, and Charis far and away stood out above everybody else because of their community involvement, the curation, just like the passion, like the special book club that they have for, interracial adoptees, like so many things that make it such a unique and special thing. And, this is we wouldn't be here if it weren't for independent bookstores, bookstores that create this community, that curate books and like put our books in people's hands, and that also allow us to connect with readers, which is really the reason why we do this, right?
And, I want to say also about Charis, which is one of my favorite bookstores and has been for a very long time. I can remember being like 16 years old and a new driver living, I live in the suburbs in like a very uncool part of Atlanta, which is not even, technically Atlanta. And so I had one like route that I was comfortable driving, which avoided highways that would get me in town, like into, Atlanta proper, specifically Little Five Points, which is where the old location of Charis was. And so when I was a teenager, I used to drive down there, walk around Little Five Points, and the highlight was always stopping by Charis, because the first time I walked into that store, it was a revelation. It was the kind of community that I wasn't seeing out in the suburbs, at least not down here in the South. And you know, that has stuck with me for decades. And that's why they make a cameo in Simon Versus. And the new location is phenomenal. It's, you know, once we're back like up and running in the real world, it's in Decatur near Agnes Scott, and it is absolutely wonderful for events, browsing, everything. So we're going to support them. We're going to get them through this, and we are going to be back in the store whenever it's safe.
Exactly. So so I feel like, I don't know who, in the audience, whether you guys know who Becky and I are when we're not authors. I mean, I know Becky is mostly an author now, but in her previous life, she was a clinical psychologist. And so she brings like this insight into like the world, obviously, and everything. And that's why it's so special for me to be talking about this book with her. So in real life, I'm a doctor as well, but I'm a urologist. So you can insert your joke here.
She's a real doctor. That was so flattering as well.
A plumber, you know, but it's not funny. People, like the other day, Samira Ahmed, when I like congratulated her on her book, she's like, "Thank you for being out there saving lives." And I'm like, I don't always save lives. I usually actually prevent lives because I do vasectomies a lot. But so, anyways, that's what I do in real life. And I'm still, you know, so I'm still full time, but like. But literature is where my heart is. And it's so interesting to be in this world after being in the medical world, because, you know, we talk about all the anxiety and pain that's going on in the world now. And it's like tenfold for the people in the medical profession. And in many ways, I wrote this book for myself when I was a teen, when I was sort of struggling with probably with undiagnosed depression without even knowing the type of language that I was going to use. In some ways, I wrote it for my kids. And I realized that right now I'm kind of writing it for my colleagues, because they're all really starting to get burned out and anxious, and like constantly, like they're constantly doing check-ins, which in some ways is one of the few good things that's happened from the crisis, that people are taking so much care in asking how other people are. It's been something extraordinary to me, even my patients, you know, asking me how I am. And that's been something that's good. And I hope we keep on doing.
I hope so too. Yeah, right before we jumped onto the live, we were talking with ER about just, you know, there are certain things about this really horrific shared experience we're having that I actually hope we hang on to. And that's one of them. So,
yeah, absolutely.
So, is now a good time for me to, I can barely, I know, you know it's coming, you know it's coming. I am about to burst. Before we even get into the conversation, I just have to tell you like how much I obsessively love this book. I just finished it a couple of days ago, so I haven't recovered yet. But this is like, I think it is a masterpiece. It is a perfectly crafted book that, you know, you are reading it for the story. And for me, like particularly the love story, which is adorable. And then partway through the reading experience, you realize like it is a fundamentally soul healing book. I found it so relatable, it was ridiculous. So there are two point of view characters, and we'll get into this more later. And I mean, I am not going to be the one to introduce Will and Jocelyn to the world, but I will say that I deeply, deeply related to both of them. And the conversations that were had in this book about depression and anxiety, and particularly just like one thing I really appreciated about kind of how depression and anxiety look in this story is there was kind of a a very realistic fluidity to it. There were days where these characters were functioning really well, and there were days where things seemed fine, that they were kind of able to manage their symptoms, or able to manage, you know, kind of however you want to, you know, just whatever language you use to talk about that, but intrusive thoughts and things like that. And then there were days when they were less fine. And, you know, that's something that I particularly appreciated. I think, I just think it was so beautiful, so realistic, and so absolutely necessary. I'm so glad this book is out in the world officially today. So seriously, y'all, buy this, please. Yeah, buy this book. I'm just going to show it to you.
Oh, so
yeah.
I did not pay Becky. I really didn't. There's no gun outside the screen pointed at her head. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that people realize that no duress.
Nothing.
Oh, yeah. Blink if you're being held hostage. But thank you, Becky. I mean, you know, it means so much to me, because not only because of your past, and because of the way I think that your books also really perfectly capture, you know, the pathos of teendom, while also being hopeful, and like being funny, and like being romantic. And I mean, that's like lightning in a bottle when you feel like you can catch that. And so it means so much to me that you felt that way, because it was a really, you know, really challenging book to write, because in some ways it was so personal. I know that my experience with anxiety and depression is not everyone's experience. And I kind of always, you know, my main reason in writing this book, and writing what my publisher likes to call a mostly happy book about mental illness, is that I do feel like so much of the media representation of mental illness is necessarily really focused on death by suicide, because obviously that's like the big, you know, devastating endpoint. But I think that a lot of the times people focus so much on that they miss a lot of the early signs, or people themselves, like I myself have thought, you know, yeah, I'm depressed, but it's not that bad yet, you know. And it's so easy to think that, like in general, when people have, I have imposter syndrome all the time. And so it's funny to think that like you can have imposter syndrome because you feel like you're not sick enough, or like you're not feeling sad enough, you know. And so it was really important for me to write a book about the process of getting to that point, and of like those early stages of identifying when there's a problem, not necessarily even when there's a problem, or when you can get help, you know, when there is room, and being open to that. Because I mean, I've been on both sides of this, both sides of the situation, where like I've been the person depressed and having someone, you know, just trying to cheer me up, and I'm like, you're not saying the right things, you know. But I've also been on the side where, you know, I've had a loved one who was like down, and like I felt completely helpless. And then the other times when I have a person who I know needs therapy or medication, and they're just so resistant to it that, you know, it makes me think back to like all the cultural stigma surrounding like every aspect of mental illness. You know, there's not as much stigma as there was before, but it's still to the point where a couple of years ago, I had to prescribe my own antidepressants, because like I didn't have enough time to see a therapist or a doctor. So I was just like, I wrote my own script. And I remember so intensely that that fear that my nurse would see the refill and like be like, oh, Dr. Wong's on medications, you know? So it's only recently through this book, you know, that I really came out with like a history of depression. And it obviously means a lot to me, but it also means a lot to me to be able to have this book to show my daughter that, you know, it's okay to talk about it really early on, even if you're not, you know, depressed enough.
Yeah, well, and one question I had for you, because one of the things that you just mentioned um, that caught my attention just now too was just kind of the way that we think about depression and mental health in general culturally. And one of the things that's so great about this book is it digs really deeply into that in a very intersectional way. Is that something you could speak about a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely within the mental health crisis in America, there's a mental health crisis for people of color, people who are the sons and daughters of immigrants, where I know certainly growing up, depression was considered like an American disease, because I think when people come to a new country, there's so many other stressors that they feel like they are part of that and that they have to power through it. And there was certainly this sense that that anything that I was feeling was something that I could either grow out of or work myself out of. And this idea that anxiety and depression are American disease is not unique to Asian Americans. The Nigerian sensitivity readers that I read talked about that as well. Just that a thing that, oh, that's not something that happens to us. Because I think certainly for people who come from areas where, survival is, something that has to do with, whether you can eat and things like that, on the hierarchy of needs, maybe it can seem like it's less pressing, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And I think I was talking to one of my Nigerian readers, and they would even have sayings, and in the rhetoric of their language, like saying that you're mad, that you're crazy, is like is a total insult, and I mean that's true of English language as well, the way that people use words like crazy and insane.
Yeah, and I think one of the things also is that we see there are these systemic barriers to accessing treatment that happen just at a lot of different moments in kind of that journey towards seeking treatment. And I read I highly recommend, after you finish this book, y'all read the author note. And one of the things that you talked about in the author note was just the idea of, and it's unfortunately not always possible. There are a lot of problems with I feel like it's like a ridiculous cliche at this point to just be like, we have some problems with our healthcare system here in this country. And certainly also kind of with respect to mental health and, what's available and what is funded and what, insurance will cover. But the idea of trying to find a therapist who, either shares a cultural background with you or has, kind of is, at the very least, has specific, just understanding and training in kind of some of those specific nuances of the way people might be thinking about depression and anxiety in ways that aren't necessarily the way that like that therapist grew up, whether that person is a white therapist or whether that therapist is a therapist of color who does not come from the same background as that client.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think that's really interesting, kind of to think about even during the treatment process. These cultural factors, can be very loud in the room. They can be really, really important.
Yeah, I mean, there's this really important concept of like minority stress that people of color, especially Black people of color, have like a certain baseline level of anxiety because of the color of their skin, because of the constant, concern over, profiling that they face, like that low level of microaggression that can happen when you walk into a store. And like I read an article recently about how COVID, obviously disproportionately affects African Americans and lays bare like all these levels of inequality in our society, but particularly like there's this new concept of weathering, the fact that because African Americans are under more emotional stress, more financial stress, they can't take care of their bodies, and so they're more susceptible to COVID, like because they, for a variety of reasons. And it's so, obviously as a doctor, you don't want to treat different patients differently, but you also have to be aware of the things that people might be at risk for. And I think that's something that, I as a doctor have, grown into understanding. It's not necessarily something they teach in all medical schools. And I did a psychiatry rotation, but it was like at a VA hospital. So it was a very specific, like setting, with mostly men and mostly older men. But I also didn't like a sort of an adolescent health section. It was really interesting that most of the people in that inpatient area, I think, were white. I don't think I remember a single person of color. And like, I don't know whether there's a suspicion within some communities to get access to that level of care, but inpatient aside, like the earlier moments, those moments, because it's really hard to find a therapist, right, Becky? I mean, you can kind of talk about that, about like the patient therapist relationship, and like how sometimes people go, I think I remember going through 2 or 3 therapists before finding one that I really felt comfortable with, and I've had significant others where like they just like go to one and then they give up because it didn't fit right. And finding that fit is particularly hard for people of color. And I mean, this is again one of those good things that came out of COVID, right? That telehealth is something that more insurances are covering. And so maybe that might be something that might improve. I mean, gosh, when the New York Times, David Brooks is like writing articles on like anxiety, you know that it's really something in the national consciousness. And I love that there are so many more people who are talking about self-care, about these sort of maybe cheesy breathing. I remember in residency, we had someone come in doing breathing exercises, like for relaxation and centering, and like everyone, like all the doctors and their like attending doctors are like rolling their eyes. They're like, why are we doing this? But like, it's really something, it's like actual medicine, it's physiology.
Yeah, well, and I think all of those points are so important, and, Eileen is absolutely right about just just some of the challenges of not only finding a therapist, but finding a therapist who is the right fit for you. I don't know that people necessarily know that it's okay to like, if you don't click with a therapist that you either speak to over the phone or meet with, like you are not locked in. And, it's such a like, that person, kind of has a training and is bringing, a level of expertise into the room, but they're also a person and you're a person and you just may not be a good fit, and that's totally fine. Another thing too is that there are a lot of different types of therapy, and some of them, you will find different studies that come out at different times, like peer-reviewed studies, may or may not, depending on which diagnosis we're talking about, may or may not have a favored treatment modality. But a lot of times, like, that is a very personal choice too. Like I know that kind of for the types of like mental health stuff that I personally deal with, like not professionally, not like when I was a therapist, but I although I did, but, like I have anxiety and depression. And, I would say by and large, a lot of the research points toward cognitive behavioral therapy, and that is extremely effective for most people. It wasn't for me. For me, I had to, I'm in therapy and I benefited greatly from therapy. I needed a different kind of therapy that was a better fit for me. And that's totally fine. And you may not realize that until you're like trying it out, and that's okay.
For people who don't know what CBT is, do you want to talk about that? Because it's something that I talk about in the novel too, that it's sort of about dissecting like what I like to call the fake news in your brain, like when your brain distorts like the input and like there's a whole list of different types of cognitive distortions, right? There's like catastrophizing, which I'm really good at. There's like
so good at it.
The all or nothing myth, I think, right? And I'm gonna forget about all of them. But.
Oh, don't ask me to name them. No, it has been a minute since I've been in practice, and I my specialty was never CBT.
Sure.
So so I'm not gonna try to explain in any kind of great detail what it is, because I don't want to lead anybody astray.
Oh, absolutely.
And a lot of people who are watching this like you may be in CBT. You likely know more about it than I do. But what it is. But it is something that is more structured compared to some other forms of therapy. It is goal-oriented. It is something that there's so many there are a lot of things that I actually really love about it. Like it is designed to be effective even if you don't have an infinite number of sessions. And the reality is with like insurance stuff, like a lot of people don't have access to years and years of therapy. And CBT is like, it is something that a lot of people see really measurable changes within the time frame that their insurance will reimburse. Not everybody in the insurance system is a hot mess, of course, but that is a huge advantage of CBT. And it is it's just also like I think a lot of clients find it to be kind of empowering, because it is like you kind of in that role, like it feels like almost like you're a collaborator with your therapist, I guess, in a way. Yeah.
I remember doing homework. Like there's like a really good handbook. And like, I think that's kind of why, so in my book, there are the 2 points of view, and like Will is sort of the more, so let me just, can I backtrack and just talk about my 2 different characters? And
let's talk about them. I love them so much. Let's talk about them.
Right. So the 2 characters are Jocelyn and Will, and Jocelyn is the Asian American girl living in Central New York. But I really and I've been wanting, my first book, I didn't really have my main character wasn't Asian. And to backtrack even further, we can talk about the very first book I ever wrote, which was a very thinly veiled autobiography of a Asian American girl growing up in Central New York. I mean, it was the first book I ever wrote, finished to end, and I got an agent with it. We put it on submission, and that was like right before like the first big crash in publishing, like with ebooks. And we got 3 different editors from big 3 houses saying, no, we love the plot, we love the voice, but it's too similar to another Asian American book on our list. And so my second book, I kind of whitewashed a little bit, and I created an intersex character because they couldn't say there's another intersex person on their list. But I deliberately made her white, because at that point there was this sense that you could have, quote, too much diversity. And that's something that's, I think, happily changing a lot in publishing. Like they're becoming more accepting of intersectional diversity, where you have multiple different identities. And so this book, I really, really wanted to write an own voices story because, you know, while there are a lot more books by Asian American authors, a lot of which I have here on my shelves, I still hadn't, you know, I wanted to tell my own story, and I really wanted to try to invert that model minority myth that I think plagues a lot of Asian Americans. I mean, in many respects, I completely like play to that model minority myth because I'm a doctor, you know, and I did play the violin for a while, not very well, but there are so many parts of me that don't fit within that trope, you know, and there are so many times during my childhood that I probably harmed myself by beating myself up for not fitting into that trope, for not being perfect enough. And in this book, it was really important for me to make it so that the mixed race Nigerian, the Black kid, was actually the one with straight A's, whose parents were doctors and lawyers. And so that was Will. And so Jocelyn is the Asian American girl, and she's sort of a middling student, but she's really into film, because that's another thing that I used to be really passionate about. I don't have as much time to go see movies anymore, but I certainly like relate to that, like that creative like urge. Whereas Will is, you know, a journalist by training and much more analytical, and thus probably much more receptive to like CBT, you know, that type of thing. Where was I going with this? But anyways, I was just showing how it was really important for me to write this in dual narrative, because I knew immediately when I knew I wanted to write a book about mental illness that I wanted to show both sides to a situation, so I could show how easily like a person can distort situations that might seem benign to someone into something catastrophic. And it was challenging. It was definitely challenging. And I'm jealous of you, Becky, because you got to have another person write your other point of view. And
I highly recommend that. Yeah. But that was, yeah, that's actually brilliant. I hadn't thought much about that. I mean, I was loving the dual point of view narrative, but that really is, it's almost like a built-in reality check for every scenario where you really are seeing it from the inside and then from the outside. And another question I had for you that's kind of related to that is, like, tell me a little bit about your decision to have both point of view characters dealing with mental illness in some way. Yeah.
I definitely wanted to do that because, you know, statistically that happens all the time, right? You know, if I don't know what the numbers these days are, but like maybe let's say 3 or 4 out of 10 people at some point have some variety of flavor, degree of mental illness. Like what happens when the people, I remember once in medical school, there was this couple that was kind of an odd couple, but I remember it being described that their neuroses complement each other, and that's why they're together. And I'm like, that makes so much sense, because like when you're anxious all the time, I think it's really easy to be worried. You would be, if you're anxious all the time and like, you know, you're constantly like worrying about someone else, if the person that you love is depressed and withdraws, then like that makes the anxiety even worse. And I feel like that definitely happened at some point, like in the book. And like seeing that relationship and like being able to put it on paper was really important to me, because yeah, I've been in relationships with people who also are depressed, and it's not always good, you know, and you have to navigate those neuroses really carefully in order for that relationship to succeed.
I mean, that was one of the things that just amazed me about this book too, because, you know, you're really seeing kind of beat by beat the ways you know, these two kids with their particular, you know, just not only their diagnoses, but also just kind of what that looks like with their particular personalities. And then, you know, you put them in a room together, in a text window together, and it is the exact kind of pattern that, you know, you can see play out in so many relationships and friendships and family relationships. It's like I don't know if you have somebody in your life who is the like, are you mad at me person? But like, I'm that person in a lot of people's lives. So like, I always feel like people are mad at me. And I could see that, like, there were moments where you could see from Jocelyn's point of view that she, you know, was experiencing, you know, some kind of, you know, depressive episode, or kind of having a moment where, you know, she was struggling to cope with her depression, and that was communicated in the way she used language, like she, you know, whether she seemed withdrawn or whether she wasn't as communicative, and just like whether she was like, I don't want to talk about it. There's one time where she was just like, I don't want to talk about it. And, you know, I've been like, you know, both people in in that conversation. It's like the fun of like comorbid depression, anxiety, but like, I so identified with Will, because I was just like, as soon as I saw Jocelyn's text there, I was like, I know that how that's gonna land with like my little anxious being Will here. Like, he is gonna, you know, like that is, he is not going to be able, because of his own like brain chemistry, and you know, he's not going to be able to read that text and be like, oh, you know, like Jocelyn, I mean, like, and actually he's had enough therapy that he is able to kind of talk himself to very, very close to being able to do this. But he's not going to be able to like emotionally detach and be like, this is completely not about me. She's clearly not mad at me. Yeah. Like, she and I are fine. This is just like, she's having a moment. Because, you know, you can't always turn that off. Like, and even if you know what depression looks like on a particular person in your life, it's still gonna hit you the way it hits you sometimes. And if you have anxiety, that might look a certain way.
Yeah. And it's in your, and thank you for bringing up chemistry. Because I mean chemistry in a bad, I mean brain chemistry, where you're not balanced, because I feel like real, you know, when people, whether it be an adult or child, realize that it's not just them, like it's not a personality flaw, but it's like actual it's chemistry, it's like the molecules in there, that is what can cause the physical signs of anxiety, you know, the physical signs of depression. I feel like realizing that lifted a huge weight off of me when I was struggling with my depression early on. I specifically remember, it was during residency, and like residency sucks, right? You know, you're sleep deprived, you're like working 80 hours a week, you're constantly being yelled at and like being told that you're not doing things right. And I would say that more than 70% of the women I know who went through at some point during their residency, they decided to begin meds. But I remember seeing a therapist and, you know, telling her at that point I had been on medications and I went off of them because I wanted to get over them. I wanted to be strong enough to be off of them, like to prove that I was like, it's like a machismo thing, you know, like I'm going to be better than this. And I went off of it twice. And that third time, my therapist was just like, your brain just needs serotonin. It's okay. And like, I've been on it ever since, like through 2 pregnancies, you know, through everything.
I had the same experience. I think, you know, it's like, and it's hard to know kind of where it comes from. And, you know, and it's a part of so many different cultures, and also so many different kind of family narratives and also so much of media, but like there is this idea that like you should be kind of as conservative as humanly possible with medication, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Mm-hmm. But I definitely had the experience, kind of as you described as well, of feeling like I'm only going to stay on this medication like as long as I absolutely need it. And then once I'm like, you know, just able to kind of just barely manage life without it, I'm going to get off it. That didn't work for me. I am on it. Yeah, my Zoloft and I, you know, had a really wonderful reunion, and we've been happy together ever since. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I actually, one of the things that was challenging when I was younger was actually the act of taking pills. Like, you know, it's, you know, doing it every day not everyone can do that. I was really bad. I was really bad about missing doses. And so they actually put me on Prozac, which has a longer half-life. And so it was less of an issue if I missed this stuff. But I know it's really hard I'm sure that's hard for a lot of young adults. Maybe if you take birth control, it's easier because you can time at the same time, but people will also miss their birth control. So it's something that, again, is something that we can just build really early, you know, for our kids, like with vitamins or something like that, you know, that discipline of taking it every day. But not that we want them to be on medications necessarily, because there are side effects, and more importantly, it's such an individual decision. But you know, hopefully it's something that people don't feel like they can't do because of the stigma.
And that, I mean, that was something, I feel like I keep coming back to me, like that was another thing that I loved about this book. And I promise, Eileen doesn't even know my Venmo. Like this is not a paid ad. I just love this book. If you know me, like you're not even surprised. If you know me and you read it, you're not surprised. But you know, when you know, medication is discussed and when different treatment options are discussed, like there is not only an emphasis on finding the right course of treatment for you, which is kind of a conversation that you, the client, whether you're a teen, an adult, you know, whoever you are, that is something that you can discuss with your doctor or your therapist. You know, a good therapist cares about your feelings about the treatment. You should have some input. They may have a recommendation. They may be kind of more confident about that, or they may feel more like, I don't know yet what's going to work, but like you have, you know, you're the one who's going to have to like buy into the course of treatment. And that's really important. And the other thing too that I thought was so important, that I don't often see talked about in books or anything, is the idea that your feelings towards treatment and what treatment you feel comfortable with and what works for you can change over time. Like even I was just sitting here being like, CBT doesn't work for me. I actually don't know. That was like 10 years ago when I tried that. You know what I mean? Like CBT might work for me now. And I think that's a good reminder, you know, like I don't want to spoil anything, but like, you know, so just to keep it vague, like there are characters kind of in this book who, you know, who have one opinion about certain kinds of treatment, and you know, and that opinion might change over time. And I think that's, you know, that's really important to talk about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember a psychiatrist friend of mine, I remember her saying something similar, that like, you know, that she just decided that she wanted to get off of medications. And I think it worked for her. But again, a woman of color, you know, like what were the pressures that were causing her to make that decision? Because, you know, I mean, I think that from the perspective of a parent, you know, it's really interesting to think about what it means to have your child start medications. Like, I wonder how many parents feel that it's like a personal failure, or that, you know, like they didn't provide, you know, and as a mom, you worry about everything. You're like, did not sending them to private school cause this, or did like breastfeeding or not breastfeeding them, you know, I mean, there are so many decision points you have to make. And I guess the bottom line is just that you have to show yourself some grace. And that's true of everything, especially right now. I'm definitely in the good enough portion of my life where if I forget a few things or don't cook a meal and order out instead, or, you know, good enough parenting is definitely the rule of thumb right now.
Yeah, and we're kind of at the stage of parenting right now where like we've accepted the fact that like 95% of our conversations are going to be related to the bathroom in some way. Mm-hmm. And my only boundary is certain specific things related to the bathroom that I don't want to think about are off the table. It's like, I'm just like, don't talk about, I don't even want to say it. I don't even want to think about it. I like had to like, yeah, it's, I mean, it's really hard. It's, you know, and I think one of the things that's so tricky about, you know, just this quarantine situation in general is that like each of us is struggling in our own kind of specific way, and sometimes that looks really different even with people who are in your immediate social circle. So yeah. You know, you have like, I know so many people who are feeling so isolated, just bored out of their minds sometimes, and just, you know, just feeling just kind of weighed down by the just amount of open time, you know?
Yeah.
My life's completely the opposite of that right now, you know, and both are valid stressors.
Yeah. Yeah.
Among many other stressors happening for people.
Yeah. So what are any tips? I mean, what are you doing right now to relieve stress?
The only thing that has been consistent day to day is I am opening the windows of my house every time the weather is not late. I mean, like, you know, not during the tornado thing on Sunday night, maybe, but like, other than that, like, windows are open whenever they can be open. That's helped more than anything.
That is such a simple, great idea. My coping mechanism is that for my husband's birthday, we got Legends of Zelda: Breath of the Wild, and that is my therapy session. Like every night, I'm just like, I just go, and like it's so completely immersive, and it's so transportive, and like takes me away from my head, you know, because like otherwise, like yesterday I was up till 3:30 or 3:30 just like thinking like, wait, this is a question I should ask Becky, blah, blah, blah. You know, like all the, you know, as everything, I need to send this email. I mean, of course, this is a busy, crazy time, but because of the, yeah, even I have more time on my hands. I mean, which is in some ways a miracle, because otherwise I don't know how I would have done this whole, you know, the book thing. But there are limits, and being able to disconnect with that and giving myself the latitude to not feel guilty about it. That's the hardest thing, is that like, you know, even my husband's like, you're playing video games? And I'm like, yes,
that is self-care. Yeah.
Self-care. It's totally self-care.
Yeah, well, and it's tricky, and I think kind of, you know, publishing and writing, just as an industry, we, this situation, the coronavirus quarantine situation has not mixed well with publishing, I will say, because, there are all of the, first of all, there are enormous stressors being placed on the system itself. When you think about kind of what indie bookstores are up against, when you think about authors who were kind of planning entire book tours and live events, book festivals, things like that. And then there's also just this really intense pressure to be productive and creative. There's this idea that well, we're home, at least we're going to get some writing done, but
no,
and not just and it's not just the homeschool stuff too.
Having the headspace in there. Yeah,
it's the headspace, and the homeschool. But I know people who just, even if you have all the time in the world and you're sitting there with Microsoft Word and stuff like that, people are struggling right now to being creative is not hard. It's not easy right now.
I'm really wondering what the creative shift in the world is going to be as a result of this. Are people going to be writing about different things? Are going to be writing about completely escapist things? Is dystopia going to come back? Or are people going to write about contemporary issues and inequality and try to there was a really interesting question yesterday that someone wrote in, actually a former bookseller, who was saying that I guess Steinbeck, and Faulkner lived through the 1918 flu pandemic, but they never wrote about it.
Yeah.
And the question was whether we thought that we would write about it.
I think that's such a great question. What a great question to ask, especially not even just contemporary authors. It's a more straightforward question for contemporary authors like us. But it applies to fantasy authors who, are weighing whether or not to incorporate this time, this moment, into their world building. And I don't know, but I think about it all the time. When I'm working, and it's just you're trying to write a rom-com, and the whole time there's this tiny little part of your brain who's looking over your shoulder, and they're should y'all be touching that? It seems like you're writing about an entirely different world where people just packs of kids in the hallways of high schools and stuff, just prom.
Yeah. At the same time, it's that question. It's that age-old question about what literature's for. Is it for escapism? Is it for reflection? Is it for both? So we have a question from the audience, which is my question too, actually. So Becky, thoughts on the new Love Victor show?
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited for the new Love Victor show. It is it's one of those things that I keep holding on to, that I'm okay, we're in our houses, but Love Victor comes right onto the computer soon, just a few more months, and we don't have to go anywhere to watch it, and we can social distance and watch Love Victor at the same time. So I would put it in my top 5 bright spots. It is I think it's going to be phenomenal. I have not seen a whole series yet.
Writing team, right? It's Elizabeth Apter, and is it the same writing team? Yeah.
It's Elizabeth Berger and Isaac Aptaker, who are the
I conflated their names. I was Elizabeth.
We married them to each other, but they're not married to each other.
Okay.
But they they are the screenwriters for Love, Simon. And they're also known for This Is Us. So they are the showrunners. of Love Victor, but there's like, you know, and I think this is pretty standard for TV. There's like a whole writer's room. And so they've assembled this writer's room where almost everybody, you know, belongs to either or, and, you know, the LGBTQ community, the Latinx community, kind of, you know, or both. So there was a lot of thoughtfulness in kind of, you know, pulling together these voices who are, you know, telling this particular story.
Right.
The actors are wonderful. I got to visit the set in November, and I got to see the pilot while I was there. So I've seen the pilot, and I've seen the like kind of bits and pieces that I saw being filmed. Mm-hmm. And it's my expectations were high, and it blew them away. So
I remember when I saw Love, Simon, just like, it was like seeing your manifestation on the screen, and this like I mean it was just so perfect, you know, and I was so happy at how well it was received, and I was so happy that it did your book justice, you know, because that was one, I think I remember when we were talking about it, like I was like, was the screenplay okay, you know? Because you know, you just never know, and you never know if you put your baby into the right hands, and that's, I'm so happy for that. And it's Disney Plus, right? That's going to be on in the fall?
It was Disney Plus. It is now going to be on Hulu. So that was a more recent change.
Oh.
Yeah, but this was actually an opportunity, because that like caused a massive controversy, and there were a couple of articles that were going around. And, you know, and I say this like with the caveat that like I personally was not in the room when any decisions were being made, because I am an author and a mom in Roswell, Georgia, you know, and I am not, you know, a film executive. So please stop yelling at me is like kind of where I'm going with that. It was like, those were some of the most stressful.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like in the like pre-pandemic life, those were pretty stressful days. But yeah, so I think it's a pretty bad look, I think, for Disney, kind of who Disney has a history of not handling like gay storylines well all the time, or just, you know, sort of hyping things up, and then it's like, you know, what was it like? It was like something in Beauty and the Beast that turned out to be just like totally like a blink and you'll miss it or something. I don't even remember, but like, you know, so Disney, you didn't have a lot of trust from the community. And so there's a lot of like understandable like side eye coming in when all of a sudden this show is leaving Disney and going to Hulu, and there's sort of a like clumsy attempt to kind of explain the switch, which I think made it worse, because they kind of brought in the phrase like family friendly. My understanding of that is what they mean by family content is like they are just, or it's more like they are splitting these platforms with kind of two different audience focuses.
I mean,
Love
Hulu
being about. Oops, sorry.
Yeah, Hulu is. I mean, have you seen? Do you have Hulu? Have you seen Penis?
No, but I want to. I think it looks amazing. Yeah.
I would watch it, right? I'm a urologist, but like, so it's really bizarre. You know, the premise is that like it's about high school, like junior high schoolers and middle schoolers, like freshmen, 13-year-olds, and like everybody is 13 except for the two main actresses who are like in their 30s, but like playing themselves. And it is so hilarious. And one of the characters is like this Asian American girl, or half Asian, I think, mixed race, who's like totally not the model minority stereotype. And it's so funny. There's like a band scene that is just, oh my gosh, Joe was like heart attack. So like, but I think of like, but the thing is that there's that funny thing, but then they have The Handmaid's Tale, so that's like a great breadth of like emotion that I think that, you know, Love Victor could, you know, easily fall in. And
oh, for sure, yeah. And Love Victor's very like, you know, I think it's from what I could see, like tonally pretty similar to Love, Simon.
Same,
but I think kind of where they're going with that, and why at least from what I was told, the why they moved it from Disney Plus is because of some like drunk characters. Basically, I think an adult character has an affair, and I think I believe there is some kind of hookup, and I'm actually not sure which characters hook up in the hookup in question. So it's more about kind of certain moments in the series.
Yeah.
It's I definitely understand people's concerns that they're like, oh, you know, Victor's gay, we're gonna take him off Disney Plus. Like, Victor being gay was like baked into the premise. Like that was like one of the first things that was discussed. And so Disney Plus acquired the show
knowing that, yeah, so it's not
knowing that that wasn't a surprise,
yeah,
to anybody at Disney Plus. So I think so I hope people will you know, give it a chance, you know, continue to you know, demand better from kind of these corporations, certainly. Also, for people who don't know too, Disney owns Hulu. So they just basically switched it to a different channel kind of under their own umbrella.
A different imprint for a publisher, you know, I mean, that makes sense.
Right. It's like a different imprint. Yeah, so I don't know if that puts anybody's minds at ease. I think I'll probably have just like another round of people yelling at me. And y'all, let me just reiterate, I am not Disney. I was not a part of any of these decisions. I just love that. I just love the show. I love Victor. I think it is going to do so much good. And I just want y'all to give it a chance.
How many episodes is it going to be? Did they say?
I think like 10.
Okay.
I think 10.
Perfect.
So.
Perfect amount for binging. Is it half hour or an hour?
I believe a half hour. I'm so sorry if I'm wrong about this stuff. I believe a half hour. Yeah.
Probably. I just have to renew. Well, although ER was just talking about a Hulu show, Dev, which he was telling me about because I
don't know that one.
World, and so we were thinking that would be really, yeah. I guess I'll have to get a Hulu subscription now. I don't know. We'll see how much longer I have time to do things. You know, it's this weird time within my practice where all the elective surgeries have been shut down, and so like I've been doing mostly telehealth, and then like once they take the breaks off of telehealth, that means that I'm gonna be operating like every day of the week. So it's like,
yeah,
you know, it's like
that transition back to like, you know, something that more resembles like, you know, the great before, like that's going to be its own kind of stressor, I think. And I think too that like those of us who are concerned and just, you know, kind of aware of like mental health stuff and kind of are tuned into some of those issues, like that's something, you know, just for us to be mindful of too. Like there are certain, you know, I think you could say triggers. Like there's certain triggers for people that come with quarantine and isolation. And there are certain ones that'll come with sort of that like, you know, gradual like reopening of stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I popped back in here. I wanted to just say thank you to everybody who has been chiming in and following along at home. We really appreciate y'all's. There's been lots of sweet comments and people talking about how you are both their two favorite authors, so that's really
Oh.
we have Kaysen Callender, another great YA writer, was in the room for a bit. I think he's still there. So
I love Kaysen. And Felix Ever After is one of my favorites.
I do not have a copy of that yet. Why don't I have a copy of that yet?
I am so sorry because
right?
you.
Right?
It's Balser and Bray. You were right. You were right to want that book. So yeah.
But Becky, do you know the fun fact though that Kaysen actually was the acquiring editor for This Is My Brain in Love before they left?
No.
I like to call them my fairy grandparent. Like,
I had no idea. Oh my gosh.
Let me tell you the origin story. So Becky, I was off the scene for a long time, because I literally wrote this proposal in 2016, November 2016. Proposal.
Yeah.
I was like
magic time.
I was at a retreat. And on the way back, I was phone banking calls for Hillary, right? And then the election happened, and I'm like, I didn't touch that proposal for a year and a half,
right.
And even when I did, it was at such an early stage with the two different voices that Will's voice definitely wasn't developed enough. And so, my editor turned it down, and I was like, I'm never going to write another book. Because I didn't, at that time, I'm still working full time, but even then, well, actually, no, technically I'm 4 days a week, but now I'm, whatever. But at that point I was working full time, and I was like, I knew that I could only sell a book if I sold on proposal, because I wouldn't have it in me to write a full book, not knowing what was going to happen to it. And so right. when that proposal got turned down, I was like, I'm a one shot, it's never going to happen again. But my agent was like, no, it's okay, let's just try it. And she gave all the caveats. The market's harder than when you first sold, none of the above, blah, blah, blah. And within a couple of weeks, Kaysen, it was like, and they got it, they totally got it. And they showed such passion for it that all of a sudden, overnight, I had a career again. So they are the fairy godparent.
Well, that's excellent.
Oh, yeah.
Well, thank you for being in the comments, Kaysen. We appreciate you. All of you who are interested in purchasing these books, please go ahead and do that if you want. And like Eileen said, we can get some book plates sent out to you. We're going to send anybody who buys the book from us, we're going to send Eileen a list, and she can directly send you book plates, so you can get a signed copy that way. We're all still figuring out how to do signed copies in this new world. But, the plus side of that is we'll be helping the post office, which is important. So
exactly.
The last thing I want to say is just thank you to you both. You are a huge light in this moment for us. You're very, honest and real about all of the different ways that you come to your work and, to parenthood and to all those things. And I think for us as a feminist bookstore, that's so much of what we hope from author conversations. It's I think sometimes, especially young aspiring writers, we have these ideas that writers are on a pedestal and you have no problems and you're rich and everything's great. And I think it's really valuable to not only model the mental health issues that you have gone through and that you continue to have as you do this amazing work that you do, but also that throughout your life you have shifted perspectives and you figured out how to approach something in a new way when it stopped working for you. And I think that adaptability and that humility and grace that you give yourself and that you give your characters is so much of the sort of political lens that we want to bring to literature, and to say that actually that's so much of the human loving way that we want to be with one another, not just in a crisis time like this, but every day. And so that's why we've always been really proud to feature both of your books and to support you as authors. And I think this conversation really highlights that. So thank you both so much. It's been a real pleasure. And we are going to be shifting this conversation over to our Karis YouTube channel so that it'll be captioned in the future. And we're working on making things as accessible as possible. So please know that is forthcoming. So thank you all so much. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we say goodbye to folks?
I mean, I just want to say thank you to both of y'all for everything you do, for hosting this, just for just the thought and care and the accessibility and like just thinking of those things. And to Eileen for letting me be a part of your tour, because I absolutely, yeah, you wrote such, okay, you wrote two incredible books, and I really hope people read this. I can't wait to talk to people about it, and it's just like such an honor to be able to like speak with you about this tonight.
Well, Becky, like I said in my post, like there couldn't be a more perfect person to talk to. I mean, we've really been through, like, it's 5 years ago we debuted on the same day.
Same day, I know. You're the twins, yeah.
So, and I always like, even back then I loved to talk about our books as blueberries. You know, they're like tasty, but they're also good for you because they will give you, they're nutritious. They're, you know, they
just like Oreos. Tasty and
good. Like Oreos. We didn't talk about our favorite genre of Oreos.
That's a good way to go out. You want to share?
Okay. Yeah. This might be controversial, but the thin mint Oreos.
What?
They are so good. Because my beef with the Oreos has always been that there's too much cream in them.
Your beef with Oreos? Yes. Yeah, so y'all watching this at home, you don't have to have a beef with Oreos. It's okay to just love Oreos and to appreciate their perfection.
I understand the need to accept your food the way it is, but just because it works for someone else doesn't mean that it will work for you. So, you know, you need to respect your opinions.
That is very on theme for this talk. That is a good note to end on.